The year is 1927. Inside a brightly lit Broadway theater, a 19-year-old blonde girl makes the entire room hold its breath. She is starring in the hit play Tommy, a production that runs for 232 consecutive nights. The New York Times critics call her a phenomenon. She is sharing the stage with the biggest names of the era. The Golden Gates of Hollywood are calling her name. On the surface, she had it all. But fast forward just 5 short years. The shattered body of that exact same golden girl is found lying at the base of the giant letter H of the Hollywoodland sign. She is completely alone in the cold, thick fog of the Los Angeles hills. She is only 24 years old. When the police arrive, they find almost nothing. But inside her purse, there is a small, crumpled note. And on that note are a few scribbled words that almost a century later still haunt the shadows of Tinsel Town. Before we step further into the dark shadows of classic Hollywood and unravel the truth behind that tragic night, I want to pause for a moment to ask where you are watching this video from today. Please let me know in the comments. I highly recommend that you go pour yourself a warm cup of tea or fresh coffee right now and find a quiet, comfortable corner in your house. The deeply personal story we are about to explore requires your utmost patience and your deepest empathy. If you consider yourself a lifelong fan of the legendary Bette Davis, you will absolutely want to pay close attention to what comes next. Did you know that Bette Davis, one of the greatest and most iconic actresses of all time, once openly admitted that she owed her entire spectacular career to one specific girl that almost no one has ever heard of? To truly understand the profound origin of this immense inspiration, we must trace back to a shattered childhood originating in London. At merely 2 years of age, little Peg found herself abruptly deprived of a mother's warm embrace, leaving a lingering ambiguity over whether the woman had tragically passed away due to illness, or if a bitter, unforgiving divorce had legally stripped away all maternal contact forever. Her father, a hard-working stage actor, struggling to make ends meet, packed their meager personal belongings and brought his vulnerable young daughter across the Atlantic Ocean to America, desperately hoping for a fresh start. There he married a remarkably kind woman named Loretta, who wholeheartedly embraced the confused little girl as her very own flesh and blood, eventually giving birth to 2 baby boys and briefly providing the incredibly stable, nurturing family environment the quiet child desperately craved. But a sinister fate was incredibly cruel, knocking on their fragile door with an unimaginable grief that would change everything. The terrifying succession of personal tragedies began in 1921, when Loretta suddenly succumbed to a severe case of meningitis, leaving the vulnerable 13-year-old girl utterly devastated. A mere 12 months later, a second, infinitely more violent nightmare struck right in the bustling heart of New York City. Her beloved father, her sole remaining anchor in the world, was violently struck down by a massive, speeding limousine in a horrific, bloody hit-and-run accident directly on the busy pavement of Park Avenue. The wealthy, heartless culprit vanished swiftly into the chaotic city streets, never to be identified, apprehended, or brought to any form of justice. Overnight, at the remarkably tender and unprepared age of 14, she became an absolute orphan, heavily burdened with the daunting, terrifying responsibility of comforting, protecting, and raising her 2 tiny, toddler half-brothers all by herself. Miraculous rescue finally came in the generous form of her uncle, Charles, and Aunt Jane, who selflessly sacrificed their own promising acting careers to permanently take in the 3 deeply grieving children. Their modest home was constantly filled with rich theatrical history and influential industry friends, including the universally esteemed Broadway superstar Walter Hampton. Recognizing the young orphan's silent suffering and her profoundly latent artistic talent, Hampton graciously offered her a tiny, completely uncredited role in a lavish production of Hamlet, acting alongside the truly legendary Ethel Barrymore. The quiet teenager was assigned incredibly simple, mundane tasks, merely carrying a small wooden cup of poison and respectfully pulling the king's heavy velvet cloak across the stage, yet physically being on that majestic platform instantly ignited a fierce, undeniable passion deep within her wounded soul. By the exact time she officially turned 17 years old, she miraculously secured the highly demanding, pivotal role of Hedvig in Henrik Ibsen's complex, emotionally draining masterpiece, The Wild Duck. Hedvig is a deeply tragic, misunderstood character who ultimately commits a desperate suicide utilizing a heavy hunting gun. The talented teenager delivered a dramatic performance so agonizingly raw, emotionally transparent, and utterly authentic that it completely mesmerized the packed theater. Sitting transfixed in the darkened, silent audience was a young girl of the exact same age who urgently tugged at her astonished mother's sleeve and firmly whispered that she wanted to be exactly like Peg Entwistle. That profoundly spellbound spectator was none other than Bette Davis. Yet this magnificent, seemingly victorious artistic triumph secretly held a terrifyingly dark, inescapable prophecy, weaving a genuinely chilling, macabre parallel between stage fiction and harsh reality. The brilliant young actress would eventually choose to end her own life like Hedvig. Moving beyond those early theatrical endeavors, her undeniable magnetism swiftly catapulted her into the most elite circles of the American performing arts scene. Between 1926 and 1932, she achieved a level of professional success that countless veteran performers could only dream of. She was officially recruited into the highly prestigious New York Theater Guild, an exclusive organization that recognized only the most extraordinary talents of that era. During this remarkably prolific period, she secured prominent roles in 10 major theatrical productions, commanding the spotlight alongside highly respected industry titans, including George M. Cohan and Dorothy Gish. Her most triumphant commercial victory arrived with a wildly popular production called Tommy, a massive hit that ran for an astonishing 232 consecutive nights to completely sold-out crowds. The notoriously strict critics at the New York Times published glowing reviews explicitly labeling her a captivating phenomenon. Major newspapers and glossy magazines constantly featured her face in special editorial spreads, cementing her status as a rapidly rising and highly sought-after starlet. Amidst this blinding professional glory, she crossed paths with a handsome, undeniably charming actor named Robert Keith, who was roughly 10 years her senior. Utterly swept off her feet by his sophisticated demeanor, she married him in 1927, believing she had finally found the stable, loving partner she had desperately yearned for since childhood. However, this seemingly perfect fairy tale union harbored a devastating, unforgivable secret that would profoundly shatter her fragile trust. Just 2 years later, she unearthed a horrifying truth that her charismatic husband had deliberately and maliciously concealed. He had previously been married to another woman and was actively hiding the existence of his 6-year-old son from that prior relationship. Feeling utterly betrayed and deeply disgusted by his calculated manipulation, she immediately filed for a highly publicized divorce in 1929, officially citing extreme emotional cruelty and severe deception in her legal documents. That hidden 6-year-old boy whom Robert Keith so desperately tried to keep secret is someone you must explicitly remember. We will absolutely encounter that exact same child much later in our historical journey, and his own bizarre, profoundly tragic destiny will undoubtedly give you absolute chills. Following the painful collapse of her personal life, the external world also began to crumble violently as the Great Depression brutally suffocated the national economy. The once thriving theater district suffered catastrophic financial losses, with expensive productions abruptly shutting down mere days after their highly anticipated opening nights. Investors pulled their funding, and audiences simply could no longer afford the luxury of purchasing entertainment tickets. Her final ill-fated project on the eastern seaboard was a promising play titled Alice Sit by the Fire. Unfortunately, the production was disastrously anchored by a veteran star named Laurette Taylor, whose severe, uncontrolled alcoholism rendered her completely incapable of performing her demanding duties on stage. The highly anticipated show was unceremoniously canceled almost immediately. Instead of receiving her legally contracted percentage of the lucrative box office profits, the hardworking young actress was coldly handed a measly single week of standard salary, leaving her dangerously vulnerable. Seeking a necessary geographical and professional reset, she traveled to Los Angeles in May of 1932 to star in a regional production called The Mad Hopes. This particular West Coast play featured a highly impressive ensemble cast, including the delightfully talented Billy Burke and a ruggedly handsome, brooding young actor named Humphrey Bogart. The prominent cultural critics at the Los Angeles Examiner enthusiastically reviewed the premiere explicitly, placing her magnificent performance on the exact same elevated level as Bogart. They were both intensely ambitious, undeniably gifted performers standing shoulder to shoulder on that wooden platform, anxiously waiting for the one monumental breakthrough that would permanently change their respective lives forever. Yet unforgiving destiny had subtly prepared two drastically different paths for these equally promising artists. One of them would ultimately survive the punishing studio system to become a globally recognized, immortalized cinematic legend, an enduring icon of masculinity and classic cinema. The other fiercely talented soul standing right beside him would tragically cease to exist within just a mere 4 short months. Just as the curtain fell on that acclaimed regional performance, the seductive, inescapable machinery of the studio system finally reached out to claim her. She was literally folding her modest wardrobe, fully intending to purchase a long-distance train fare back to the familiar theatrical community of New York, when the telephone suddenly rang with a monumental, life-altering proposition. RKO Pictures was urgently demanding an immediate screen test. The highly prestigious studio was currently gearing up for an incredibly ambitious psychological suspense thriller titled 13 Women. It was a massive, highly anticipated financial undertaking, meticulously overseen by the legendary, incredibly powerful Hollywood producer David O. Selznick himself. The impressive marquee boasted colossal, universally recognized industry heavyweights like the elegant Irene Dunne and the deeply mesmerizing Myrna Loy. Securing a prominent spot in this particular cinematic endeavor felt exactly like holding the ultimate winning lottery ticket. She was officially cast as Hazel Cousins, a complex, deeply troubled, supporting character, strategically designed to command a substantial 16 minutes of crucial screen time. However, this highly promising cinematic debut soon collided violently with the severe moral panic of the conservative era. In the original source novel, Hazel Cousins was explicitly written as a fiercely independent woman harboring deep, forbidden homosexual desires. The ambitious young actress bravely filmed an incredibly daring taboo, pushing dramatic sequence where she tearfully confessed to her on-screen husband that she fundamentally despised any physical intimacy with him, heavily implying a passionate, completely forbidden romantic entanglement with another woman. Such audaciously progressive storytelling immediately triggered the absolute wrath of the notoriously strict Hayes office, the ultimate conservative religious authority aggressively governing all cinematic morality across the nation. Horrified by the subversive homosexual undertones, the powerful censorship board aggressively targeted her specific storyline for immediate destruction. Ruthless editing room shears surgically removed almost her entire brilliant performance, violently slashing her carefully crafted 16 minutes of acting down to a fleeting, entirely insignificant 4 minutes. She was effectively erased from the final theatrical print before the wider world even had a proper opportunity to witness her raw cinematic talent. The excruciating sting of this brutal cinematic mutilation was heavily compounded by a devastating behind-the-scenes revelation regarding her initial, highly celebrated studio agreement. When she joyfully signed that highly coveted RKO contract, she genuinely believed she was being carefully groomed for the monumental, heavily promoted lead role in director George Cukor and his upcoming cinematic masterpiece, A Bill of Divorcement. That specific leading part was a highly dramatic star-making vehicle perfectly suited for her intense, highly refined theatrical background. Instead, that massive career-defining opportunity was unexpectedly handed directly to a relatively unknown, fiercely independent, and remarkably unconventional newcomer named Katharine Hepburn. That single fateful casting decision immediately launched Hepburn into the permanent, untouchable stratosphere of immortal cinematic royalty, leaving the devastated, highly experienced theater veteran entirely relegated to a heavily butchered, entirely forgettable supporting background character in a completely different, vastly inferior movie. Following this agonizing, deeply humiliating sequence of professional setbacks, the massive, heavy oak doors of the studio system slammed permanently and decisively shut in her face. When her short-term contract officially expired, cold calculating RKO executives flatly refused to offer any form of renewal or extension. It was not a personal, malicious vendetta against her specific artistic capabilities, but rather a ruthless, systematic corporate purge directly driven by a rapidly collapsing national economy. Producer David O. Selznick publicly defended the massive, devastating wave of studio terminations casually and cruelly, dismissing the shattered livelihoods of hundreds of hard-working contracted performers as simply trimming the excess fat from the bloated, unsustainable corporate payroll. She was merely an unlucky, totally expendable name sitting silently at the very bottom of a cruel, unfeeling studio accountant and their financial ledger. Suddenly, she found herself utterly stranded in the sprawling, terrifyingly unforgiving expanse of Los Angeles. Her meager, carefully hoarded financial savings were completely and totally depleted. She lacked the basic essential funds necessary to purchase a simple railway ticket back to the familiar, welcoming theater stages of the East Coast, where she might have eventually salvaged her dignity and secured steady, reliable employment. She was entirely trapped in a strange, brutally superficial desert city where her absolutely only meaningful personal connection was her aging, financially struggling Uncle Charles. The devastating, suffocating weight of the Great Depression was aggressively and mercilessly crushing the entire American landscape, ensuring that even her formerly wealthy, highly successful theatrical friends were now desperately broke and entirely incapable of providing any financial assistance whatsoever. The glittering, seductive illusion of cinematic stardom had rapidly dissolved into a terrifying, inescapable nightmare of absolute poverty and profound professional isolation, leaving her completely paralyzed with fear and overwhelmingly suffocating despair as thick shadows gathered ominously all around her. Confined within the stifling late summer heat of 1932, her physical world rapidly shrank to the modest boundaries of her aging relative's residence located at 2428 Beechwood Drive. This specific address possessed a uniquely agonizing geographical feature that actively tormented her deeply fragile, psychological state every single morning. The unassuming house sat directly beneath the imposing, rugged slope of Mount Lee, where the colossal, brilliantly illuminated letters of the Hollywoodland sign stood fiercely against the California skyline. Those massive white wooden structures were originally erected merely to advertise a luxury real estate development, but to her weary eyes they transformed into a grotesque, towering monument constantly mocking her devastating professional rejection. She was a highly celebrated, classically trained theatrical performer who had profoundly moved sophisticated Eastern audiences, yet this superficial Western desert town coldly deemed her utterly worthless. Sitting quietly on the porch, she penned agonizingly sorrowful letters to distant relatives, her elegant handwriting revealing a deeply profound, inescapable despair. She possessed absolutely no financial resources, no viable employment prospects, and completely lacked any conceivable method of returning home. The suffocating weight of this absolute geographic and emotional entrapment finally reached its devastating breaking point on the quiet, incredibly tragic Friday evening of September 16th. Wrapping herself against the approaching twilight chill, she casually approached her exhausted uncle with a completely fabricated, heartbreakingly simple final lie. She softly claimed she was merely stepping out for a brief stroll down the street to meet a few casual acquaintances and purchase a new reading book from a local vendor. She did not walk toward the bustling commercial district. Instead, she deliberately turned her back on the populated avenues and began a grueling, fiercely solitary ascent up the incredibly steep, treacherous dirt trails, snaking behind the quiet residential neighborhood. The slow, agonizing climb forced her to push through brittle, sun-baked bushes and thick, suffocating layers of dry summer brush that aggressively tore at her clothing. With every agonizing step higher into the desolate wilderness, the sprawling, glittering metropolis of Los Angeles revealed itself spectacularly below her feet. Millions of electric lights twinkled like scattered diamonds in the vast urban basin, representing a magical, promising kingdom that had lured her across the continent only to violently strip away her dignity, her precious career, and her fundamental will to exist. Reaching the desolate summit beneath the 50-foot-tall letter H, she discovered a wooden maintenance ladder quietly leaning against the massive structural beams. In the heavy, chilling darkness, she methodically removed her heavy outer coat, neatly placed her walking shoes on the dusty ground, and set down her personal purse containing her final written thoughts. She then gripped the rough wooden rungs and pulled herself upward into the pitch-black night air. The horrific tragedy of that fateful leap is deeply compounded by the profoundly agonizing isolation that immediately followed. While her broken body violently struck the unforgiving earth late Friday night, the bustling world below simply continued spinning, entirely oblivious to her silent disappearance. For 2 agonizingly long, incredibly cold nights, and nearly 2 full days, she lay entirely alone, severely crushed and hidden within a dark, desolate, rocky ravine nearly 100 feet below the towering wooden structure. Nobody realized she was missing. Nobody organized a frantic search party. The brutal indifference of the sprawling city below perfectly mirrored the cold, mechanical reality of the massive, cinematic industry she had so desperately tried to conquer. She simply vanished into the dark shadows, becoming just another shattered dreamer entirely discarded by a deeply unforgiving town that constantly prioritized highly profitable manufactured illusions over genuinely suffering, profoundly broken human beings. It was not until the bright, sunny afternoon of Sunday, September 18th, that a completely anonymous female hiker, casually navigating the rugged upper trails, stumbled upon the neatly arranged pile of abandoned personal belongings. Opening the discarded purse seeking identification, the unsuspecting stranger discovered a hastily scribbled piece of paper before cautiously peering over the dangerous precipice to spot the horrific scene below. Deeply traumatized, the anonymous hiker frantically alerted. Local law enforcement authorities carefully gathered the abandoned items into a tight bundle and quietly left them sitting on the cold stone steps of the Hollywood police station before vanishing forever. The highly disturbed and entirely broken young woman had deliberately left behind a deeply haunting final written testament to document her overwhelming psychological suffering. Written on that tiny, wrinkled, discarded scrap of paper was an unbelievably sorrowful, tragically personal message that perfectly captured her exhausting internal battle and absolute total defeat before jumping. Reading exactly as follows: I am afraid I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain, P.E. In the immediate, highly chaotic aftermath of that truly profoundly heartbreaking discovery, an incredibly cruel narrative twist emerged that has been continuously whispered throughout the entertainment industry for nearly a full century. Many fascinated historians firmly believe that just a mere few days after her physical departure, a thoroughly unexpected sealed piece of mail was finally delivered to her grieving uncle from the respected Beverly Hills Playhouse. This allegedly delayed envelope contained an enthusiastic invitation offering her the primary leading part in an upcoming theatrical production. In a genuinely chilling stroke of irony, the specific character she was officially asked to portray was a deeply troubled woman who ultimately takes her own life in the final act. This legendary tale has become an inseparable part of her enduring myth, suggesting that if she had simply waited another 48 hours to open that specific envelope, she just might have found a compelling artistic reason to keep fighting. Another deeply tragic misconception surrounding her sudden demise involves her solitary cinematic endeavor. 13 Women officially premiered at the lavish Roxy Theater in New York on October 15, 1932, which was nearly a full month after she had already perished. Despite an absolutely massive promotional budget and extensive nationwide marketing campaigns, heavily pushed by the incredibly wealthy studio executives, the ambitious motion picture was ultimately a critical and commercial failure. However, the vital truth remains that she did not end her existence because she received negative performance reviews or witnessed the film completely flop. She was already gone long before the cinematic project ever reached the public screens. She never read a single professional critique. She succumbed entirely to a profound internal despair, not to public artistic humiliation. Yet the brutal irony of her desperate situation immediately manifested in the national press. News of her dramatic leap instantly flooded major newspaper front pages across the entire country. From a struggling performer, whom the vast majority of the general American public had never even heard of, she was sensationally transformed overnight into a legendary cultural figure. Sensationalist reporters aggressively capitalized on the profound melodrama, printing deeply exaggerated narratives that permanently captured the wildly morbid fascination of the general public. The Los Angeles Herald-Examiner officially dubbed her the Hollywood sign girl, eternally cementing her tragic identity. The massive, widespread fame and universal recognition she had so desperately craved her entire professional life finally arrived in absolute abundance, but it only materialized when she was no longer breathing to actually experience it. The suffocating darkness surrounding this tale inexplicably stretches far beyond her own isolated timeline. You might recall that hidden 6-year-old stepson from her previously disastrous, deceptive marriage. That innocent little boy eventually grew up to become the highly beloved television actor Brian Keith universally recognized by millions of adoring older American viewers as the warm, comforting Uncle Bill in the classic television sitcom Family Affair, which aired successfully from 1966 to 1971. Decades later, a terrifyingly familiar shadow aggressively descended upon his own successful family. In 1997, the widely adored television patriarch shockingly committed suicide. This horrific event occurred a mere 10 weeks after his own beautiful daughter, Daisy Keith, also tragically chose to end her own life in the exact same heartbreaking manner. Could there possibly be some invisible, deeply malevolent darkness stalking this specific family across multiple generations? Or is this merely the most violently cruel, statistically impossible coincidence that classic Tinsel Town has ever witnessed? The deeply unsettling aftermath of her passing gradually evolved into highly persistent, supernatural folklore that actively continues to this very day. Beginning in the 1940s, roughly around the exact time the massive wooden letter H mysteriously collapsed under strange circumstances, locals started quietly sharing truly eerie encounters. Respected park ranger John Arbogast publicly recounted multiple instances of observing a mysterious blonde woman dressed entirely in authentic 1930s vintage clothing, silently wandering near the massive structure, particularly during heavy, disorienting evening fog. A remarkably similar, deeply chilling incident occurred in 1990 when a local couple was casually walking their pet dog along the isolated dirt trails of Beechwood Canyon. The animal suddenly became paralyzed with intense, inexplicable fear, frantically cowering behind its confused owners. Moments later, the bewildered couple clearly observed a highly disoriented woman wearing antique garments, aimlessly pacing the rugged hillside, before she literally vanished into thin air directly before their astonished, terrified eyes. In almost all of these bizarre, unexplained nocturnal sightings, panicked witnesses consistently report the sudden, incredibly overwhelming scent of freshly blooming gardenia flowers, instantly filling the dry canyon air. That highly distinct, incredibly heavy floral fragrance was universally well known among all her former theater peers as her absolute favorite, undeniably signature perfume throughout her brief life. When we carefully step back to thoroughly examine the absolute entirety of this deeply heartbreaking narrative, it immediately becomes abundantly clear that Peg Entwistle was never actually a failure in any true artistic sense. She was undeniably a truly magnificent, classically trained stage actress who effortlessly commanded the utmost professional respect of strict Eastern theatrical critics. She was the profoundly powerful initial artistic spark that directly inspired the incredibly legendary Bette Davis to finally pursue her own monumental cinematic destiny. Her ultimate breathtaking tragedy did not stem from any lack of genuine acting talent or fierce personal dedication to her craft. Instead, her fatal misfortune was simply arriving at the completely wrong geographic location during the absolute worst possible historical timeline. She found herself hopelessly trapped within a deeply cynical, incredibly ruthless industrial machine that actively crushed any fragile soul who failed to perfectly fit its rigid, manufactured mold. The ultimate enduring lesson we must deeply absorb from her tragically brief existence is quite profound. Sometimes what ultimately destroys us is not actually our personal failure itself, but rather the unbearable, agonizing distance between where we currently stand and where we fiercely believe we truly belong. Yet perhaps her restless spirit has finally found some measure of long overdue comforting peace. In the year 2021, a beautiful, vibrant, commemorative mural depicting her glamorous likeness suddenly appeared on a public brick wall in Port Talbot, Wales, which was her original forgotten birthplace. Almost 90 full years after her violent, lonely departure, the wandering, orphaned girl from across the vast Atlantic Ocean finally received a permanent, welcoming home to return to. Even today, dedicated morning joggers and casual weekend tourists navigating the dusty, winding trails of Griffith Park frequently report catching that unmistakable, hauntingly sweet scent of blooming gardenia, floating faintly near the towering white letters. It feels exactly as if she is still quietly lingering up there, patiently waiting in the cold shadows for that one monumental starring opportunity she never actually received in life. Her incredibly tragic earthly journey actively forces every single one of us to constantly reevaluate the exceptionally heavy unseen price of blinding personal ambition and the incredibly dark, toxic underbelly of the highly competitive, glamorous entertainment industry. If you grew up faithfully watching the beloved classic television program Family Affair and consistently held a deep personal fondness for the exceptionally warm, comforting character of Uncle Bill, did you ever realize the incredibly dark, tragic history surrounding the young, ambitious stepmother that little Brian Keith never truly got the chance to know? Please take a brief moment to share your personal thoughts and emotional reactions regarding this heartbreaking historical saga in the comment section below. And if you possess a deep, genuine appreciation for continually uncovering these profoundly moving, deeply hidden, untold stories, constantly lurking just beneath the glamorous, shimmering surface of the golden age of classic Hollywood, please ensure you press that subscribe button right now to officially join our growing community today.